what we refer to as the housing policy. And by definition, the housing policy refers to the actions and regulations implemented by governments to manage the available, affordable, and quality of housing for citizens. The goals of the housing policy can vary uh, from country to country. However, uh, the most common objectives or the most common goals are that one is that the housing policy aims to achieve an affordable housing in order to ensure that housing is affordable for low and moderate income households. Secondly, the objective is for home ownership. It aims to encourage home ownership among citizens. And then third is that it aims to enable rental housing, that it regulates the rental market to protect tenants and ensure affordable rentals. So that leads us to the fourth, which is the housing supply. It is encouraging the development of new housing stock to meet demand. Housing quality also ensures that houses meet minimum standards of safety, health, and comfort. Then another objective is to ensure social housing and also to ensure urban planning. And when we're referring to social housing, we're referring to providing subsidized housing for vulnerable populations such as the elderly, the disabled, and the low income families. But also, we're looking at the urban planning itself. And in urban planning, we're saying it helps us manage urban growth and development to ensure sustainable and livable communities. So, as a scholar of urbanization and migration, you should be able to look at your local context. You should be able to look at the objectives of the housing policy for that particular nation. For example, we could be having our housing policy for urban areas in South Sudan. So you need to look through the objectives of that particular document, and you'll be able to understand that majority of what we have stated here are some of the common objectives of developing a policy or that instrument that helps to guide the aspect of housing in a particular country. And more importantly for you is for you to be able to understand how those particular policies actually influence urbanization. So you should be able to understand whether the policy that you have uh, whether the policy that you have in your particular country is actually one that can be able to promote urbanization. So just to give us an offset housing policy, which is not part of these notes, but which we can be able to recap on. There are some instruments that are mostly used for us for these policies to be implemented. For example, if you're referring to rental housing, the instruments that are continuously used, we have subsidies and grants, controls and stabilizations. We also have zoning and land use regulations. We have building codes and standards. We have public housing programs. We have housing finance and mortgage regulations. So these are some of the instruments that government uses to regulate urban growth or uses in terms of housing policy. So if government wants more people to have houses, then you'll realize they have positive instruments that they are using. Probably they have subsidies against they have subsidies for materials for construction of houses, such as cement. So if they wanted people to move away from grass-thatched houses, you would realize they put a ban on the use of grass, and then they probably reduce the prices, the prices of of iron sheets. So those are some of the instruments that can be used for you to promote a positive housing policy in your particular area. So some of the benefits of having an effective housing policy is that housing becomes more affordable, and access to housing becomes more easy. But also there is improved housing quality and safety, where you have people having better houses. But also you can have reduced homelessness and housing insecurity, where we see in many of the developed countries people living under the trees, and so forth and so forth. So, in conclusion, in other words, I'm saying that a housing policy is actually a very crucial aspect of social and economic development. And the word social and economic development and its impact on individuals is very important for you as a demographer. So, if you understand your housing policy, you should be able to understand why your housing status is at where it is today. So your interest should be in being able to look at your current household policy, your current housing policy vis-a-vis how households are being the way houses are socially but also economically in your community, just by mere look at the housing policy in your community. So that takes us to what we've been referring to as the housing problem. And when we're referring to the housing problem, we're not actually referring to uh, that houses are a problem. But when we're referring to housing problem, we are referring to the houselessness or the quality of houses that are predominant in Eastern, but also in developing in the developing world. So you can be able to see there that there are statistics showing that actually we have a severe housing shortage. In other words, that the developing world or the entire world has about 17 million units shortage of houses. But the whole world is even very far to look at. You should be able to look at your community itself. But even mere looking at the community uh, might be very far. Just look at one of the institutions in your community, probably let's say schools. You will realize that a school a room that is meant to contain about 20 students, the ratio will be twice that one. So you'll have that housing structure that is in a school contain I mean double what it is supposed to carry. But you'll also see that in your community, uh, that you will have you will have houses that are being occupied by people twice the number that is supposed to occupy them. So those are how what we refer to as the housing problem. And therefore, for you, I encourage that you don't look at the housing problem in isolation, but you should be able at the housing problem in terms of how it affects demography, how it affects, in other words, when I'm referring to demography, how does it affect the population composition? How does it affect the population growth rate? How does it affect migration? How does it affect fertility? How does it affect mortality? So you should be able to look at some of those issues. So if we have a shortage of houses, then you should be able to understand what probably it is causing. Meaning, sometimes if the quality is also a problem, then it is we should be able to we should be able to look at the housing problem in terms of affordability, the supply. You should be looking at how homelessness, but also you should be able to look at the quality. You should be able to look at accessibility, environmental sustainability, and all that. So because then this is where the problems are. Because if five household members are sleeping uh, in a house that is supposed to occupy two people, then there should be an issue. But also if the adolescents and young people are sharing the same households with their parents, or I mean rooms with their parents, then we should be able to realize that there could be a problem. Issues of morals will come in. So if these children start practicing or start having, if you looked at your age at first sex or age at first marriage, some of the issues are being caused by they come as far as the housing problem, because it is a very broad issue. But also, leave alone issues that are very social like that. You realize housing problem also has an issue related to health, and because of the proximity probably of houses, the chances that infections can easily spread are very high. But also, if you're looking at in terms of economics, you realize that having people in one house with your food and so forth would have an economic impact on you, because uh, at the end production is low, because you have to keep feeding this particular population, yet you're unable to afford, because by the mere virtue that your house is you have one room that accommodates over five people, that is not supposed to be like that. So you have to look at it in all that manner, but also the environmental sustainability itself. You have to look at it and see, if you have very many households occupied in one place, then the chances that that place will be a bare ground and there won't be any other plantings, because people take they fear that the trees might fall on them, or they fear the tree leaves might make the place dirty, so that entire place might be bare. So the more congestion the houses have in an area, the higher chances that that place environmental is unsustainable. So that is how you should be able to look at it in terms of demography. Then another housing problem that is here, we're looking at inability of many house families to afford proper housing. We're looking at long-standing issues of land and housing supply. So many families cannot afford proper housing, but also the quantity of land and the number of houses that are available that can be bought, as well as limited for the population. So, like I had explained earlier on, that policy goals or objectives vary from country to country, and we're just highlighting a few of them right here. But these are all that we had already highlighted. Provide low income housing, increase home ownership rates, bridge the housing deficit. So the key measures is that we have what they call a national housing fund that is established to improve access to housing loans, and very many countries have this idea that is coming up. However, it is not very common in some of the struggling or in some of the developing economies, because sometimes this national housing fund is just is it's established so that where they can be able to construct better houses. And this might be in some economies, but in Africa it is in few economies. So we expect that countries can be able to develop these particular national housing funds, but also we can do mortgaging and establishment of these mortgages. For example, there's a Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria that oversees and regulates the housing loan system. So establishing a mortgage system helps you manage the access to housing, and I think it is one of the measures that can help to improve housing. But also site and service schemes. These provide basic infrastructure such as roads, water for low-cost housing development. So you can have either this can be privatized, or this can be by the government. But what happens is that you can be able to have a site and services scheme where you're providing services at the site, and that's why we're saying you provide basic infrastructure. For example, you provide the roads, or you put the water there. So all those help to improve the housing system, because we have houses that are constructed, but they do not have they do not have roads leading there. They are just there, and they do not even have access to water. They do not have access to electricity. So it makes it a little hard for people to continuously develop in that kind of a place. So it is fair that you employ a key measure and provide site services to these places. But there is also a way of doing a public-private partnership, which encourages collaboration with government and the private sector for mass housing projects. So, for example, just one of our East African neighbors, Rwanda, has a public-private partnership regarding housing, and you realize that for them, their housing policy is actually one of the I would say one of the best in East Africa, because they have made construction of houses in a way that you construct the house, government is able to do for you the construction, because of that private partnership. Private companies private companies uh, are able to do what? They are able to construct for you. They're able to construct for you uh, houses. For example, we can allocate one village and have construction of all houses, and these houses are of the same number of units. These are houses that have the same number of people that are expected to live in there. Roads are constructed in that particular village. So you would have that particular area uh, with the necessary housing construction and the standard that has been set. And therefore, your work as a citizen to pay to pay government, but sometimes it is on a subsidized price, but also sometimes uh, uh, government can be able to offer for you a few subsidies or tax relief so that you're able to clear some of those amounts for families they feel are very poor. So that is how the public-private partnerships can actually work. And if you went and took a look around Rwanda, you realize that it is actually one of the most organized countries in terms of housing in East Africa, because they have standards on which type of housing to construct and where. However, most of the East African countries still do not have that problem. So the overall policy thrust is increased housing supply, promote private sector involvement in housing development, but also facilitating mortgage financing for home ownership. So there are some theories as well on housing here, but just before we look at this Marxist trend and the particular theory, when we're discussing issues of overall policy and thrust, it is important that we understand where our countries are, or where your society is at that level, at what state is your society in terms of housing. We need to first look at our local context first. Then this nationwide for low income earners, we mean that it is easy for them to actually afford housing. Could be levels of employment, we look at levels of education, we look at the sex. So if you have a society that is predominantly women, or in your society there it is predominantly women, and yet our cultural uh, beliefs are that women actually get married and move away from those places, it will give you an idea of how you should be able to structure uh, some of the policies. So you wouldn't want to go and empower a community of low income earners that are youth and they are female in that particular area, because at the end they will abandon those houses. They will abandon the houses and move where their husbands are, and your program would have failed. But also you may start to facilitate, you may take a mortgage idea to a population that is predominantly uh, pastoralist. For people who believe that for them their cattle is their life. Eh? We have those societies that have cattle as their life, and therefore for you, if you took your program there, and it is and it is targeting targeting them, then your houses will be abandoned. I often tell people about stories of the Karamajong in Uganda, where their belief is that you're not supposed to defecate in a toilet, or what they were referring to as a house. So we have this project that came there, constructed toilets all over the place, because they were claiming that the open defecation percentage in Karamoja is about 90%, and therefore they wanted to tackle that issue. So they constructed a lot of toilets for them so that they can be able to curb the issue of open defecation. But within the last 3 months, after all the projects were handed over to the community, the open defecation rate remained at 90. Why? Because they believed that you cannot go and defecate in a very nice building like that. That the building is extremely nice, and I cannot go and defecate there. But also, the cultural perspective alone did not allow for them to store their fecal matter in a house, or in a hall, say so. So the project flopped for that particular aspect, and therefore that is why we're saying, because we have studied how to do research, but also you must uh, sorry for that. Sorry for that. I think. Are you still able to see my screen? I had a very short disruption there, but are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
so as I was saying, uh, we've been able to do. We've studied subsequently in the other modules we have, that you need to first do a community assessment, needs assessment. So similarly, you need to understand how your community is before you are able to develop some of these particular strategies that you would want. So we want to look at the Marxist trend in housing, uh, and that policy itself. So we have theories, like we had in urbanization, but also here we have a few theories that we would want to look at. And we would want first to look at what we call the Marxist trend, that focuses on class and economics. It aims, or it assumes, that housing is a commodity, and therefore housing is an essential commodity for economic development, because it provides shelter for the or for the workforce. Housing development is linked to various industries and contributes to the overall economic growth. It also believes that housing is a fixed asset, and housing is permanent and cannot be easily relocated. Land ownership and pricing differ between socialist and capitalist countries. Socialist countries aim to control land speculation and ensure affordability. However, capitalist countries, we know, look more onto the issues of their economy. So for it, it focuses on the relationships between class, economics, and housing. It examines how housing is shaped by capitalist systems and how it reproduces social inequalities. And therefore, when you are examining this particular theory, you have to look at all the assumptions that the Marxist theory looks at. So the policy implications, this perspective emphasizes government intervention in housing through public housing policies, and for it, when you know the word Marxism, for those who have been able to do sociology, you realize this is more from Karl Marx, and some of the Marxist strategies are that the displacement of low-income working class residents by affluent newcomers leads to an increased property value. So for it believes that the environment or the housing policy is being controlled by capitalists. So uh, you'll realize that it has rent control. So the fight between the rent control will be between the capitalists, who are the dominant people. So for you, if you're in a rent and you are unable to pay your rent dues, the policy believes that you be chased out of your rental, and another person who is able to afford should be able to enter there. So it is more of a capitalist. It is more of a capitalist what theory that explains housing in that format. So you can go ahead and be able to read through the Marxist trend, but some of the few highlights is that housing is of the Marxist theory is that housing is a basic need, but also it's treated like a product to make money. So that is what the first statement meant there. That whereas it is a basic need, but it is also a product in the market. So rich people and companies control most of the housing, and they charge poor people too much rent. Then the government helps the rich people and companies, not the poor people. So this system causes problems like homelessness, unaffordable rent, and gratification, where rich people move into poor neighborhoods and push out the poor people. So to fix these problems, we need to work together and make housing a right for everyone, not just a privilege for the rich. So we need to take control of housing away from the rich and the companies and give it to the community. This therefore means making decisions together, sharing resources, and making sure everybody has a safe and affordable place to live in. That is that is how simple we can explain that particular theory of Marxism. Then that leads us to that leads us to okay, beyond mute. That's okay. That leads us to another theory that is talking about the liberal trend, and this is just coming from the word liberty. And liberal means people have a free will to do certain things, and therefore this particular theory focuses on individual needs and market dynamics. Housing, here it is mainly Housing as a process versus housing as a product. Earlier on, you realize Marxism looks at housing as a product, but in the liberal trend, how in the liberal trend, here we're looking at housing as a process. So it distinguishes between housing as a static product and a dynamic process. The verb approaches emphasizes housing adaptability to meet residents' evolving needs and its role in the housing market. Housing and the social change. Housing is interconnected with broader social and economic changes. It is not just a physical structure, but also it involves investment and reflects societal progress. This is what I was telling you about. That that us looking at housing, we should not just look at it. We should not just look at it from from a point of view that housing is probably is probably just something of a structure alone, but we should be able to look at it. We should be able to look at it from a more effect side. In other words, you cannot just look at a house and say these people have and these ones don't have. These ones have, these ones don't have. You should be able to understand deeper. How many people have housing in your community? What is the average number of people living in your household? That is why some of these questions are always critically asked. What is the average number of people living in your household? We look at average in terms of age. What is the average age of people living in your household? What is the average, what is the sex ratio of people living in your household? Because the house alone impacts a lot. You may have a lot of young people living in your house, and therefore that already causes an issue among the adolescents. But also you may have only one male or a lot of female in your household. So those are already causing issues. Why? Because you may not look at it from a reproductive health issue alone, but since this is your area of focus or area of specialization, you should be able to look at the impact of housing on reproductive health, the impact of housing on reproductive health. But also, you should be able to look at the impact of housing on public health, the impact of housing on economics or household income. So all these. So if you had a study that is looking at the impact of housing on household income, you can be able to have demographics such as the sex of the household head, the average or the age of household members. You would be able to have the sex of the household members. So if you interviewed any household, or if you interviewed households in regard to in regard to the aspect of income, you realize probably there could be a relationship between households that only have female or who have more female in their houses than households that have at least a male having lower income status than those households. Why? Probably traditionally the values and the roles of women or a female that could be having men who regularly move, and their role is more economic than household chores. This perspective, this particular perspective of of housing. So it again looks at resident needs versus profit motive. So in other words, here we're just doing a comparison between the Marxist and the liberal here. Whereas the Marxist looks at a profit motive, like I said earlier on, the liberal looks at the residents' needs. So while housing affects residents, the liberal approach prioritizes housing market mechanisms and maximizes returns on investment over specific dwelling measurements. So for it does not look at profit motive but more of a residence need. But also it's independent housing provision. This approach values individual family needs and preferences. Factors like the income level, the education level, and the desired location influence housing choices, and the private sector involvement and individual house buildings are emphasized in here. So it goes deeper to look at the needs of an individual in there. So the labor trend in housing studies, we can just summarize. I can just give you a little brief about it in this way, that people should be free to choose their own housing. The housing market should be like any other market, with supply and demand determining prices and availability. That the government should not interfere too much in the housing market. But remember, the other side, we were talking about interferes with housing in order to favor the capitalists. Then people have the right to own and control their own property. The government should only help when there is a clear problem. Housing is a commodity, not a product. So a commodity, in other words, it's a basic need. So people are responsible for their own housing choices and the outcome. So this is how the liberal people actually want it. In simple terms, the liberal trend wants you to give freedom to choose where they live. You let the market work things out. It's a laissez-faire market and supply, demand and supply. There is limited government interference. You respect individual property rights. You only help when it is necessary, and you encourage personal responsibility. So that is, in other words, in brief, what the liberal theory says regarding housing. Then we have what we call the temperate trend, or one that focuses on balance and social responsibilities, and it looks at housing and family economics. This perspective views a family's economic situation as a key driver of the housing improvement. So housing market mechanisms are seen as influenced by different social classes and their ability to afford better housing. So in other words, this theory specifically looks at someone's it looks at someone's levels of income. That the level of income of an individual, or the family economics that it is referring to here, that what are the income levels of the household or the family, and therefore there it is necessary that particular the particular uh, uh, economic levels of that family or of that household are the them into housing improvement or not. So households that do not necessarily have economic power will stay in poor quality houses compared to those that have better socio-economic classes. So housing for social well-being, housing should be suitable for healthy living and meeting environmental standards. Essential services like water, sanitation, and electricity are very crucial for both individual families and society as a whole. Uh, and housing as a social good. Housing is considered a basic need that all social classes deserve. Governments have a responsibility to ensure its provision and promote equality in access. So, in other words, in simple terms, the temperate trend in housing finds a balance between government help and individual freedom. So, remember, in the Marxism, we said there is total government interference. In the liberal, we said there is no government interference. But here, we're saying there is a balanced government help and individual freedom. And we're again saying that housing is important for the community, so we need to make sure everyone has it in place. And both government and private companies should work together to provide housing just. So, in other terms, we should be able to put rules and protect people with rules. You need to put rules in place to protect people and make sure the housing market is fair. And then you make sure there are affordable housing options for people who need it most. And you need to involve the community in housing decisions and development. Then build housing that is good for the environment and the society. So that is what the temperate aspect looks at. In other words, it's looking at a medium approach. So this approach seeks a middle ground mostly, which combines the benefits of government support and individual freedom to create a fair and sustainable housing system. So that is typically the three theories of housing that I wanted us to share and just look through in there. I hope that is okay. So we want to look at the housing problem in developing countries, and we want to just highlight key factors that are contributing to housing problems in developing countries. We shall run through these ones quickly because in my previous explanations, I think I've been able to explain uh, explain. So policy failure is one of the problems. It was one of the key factors contributing to the housing problems. That there are not effective housing policies that ensure affordable housing availability, and majority of the housing policies in developing countries are more Marxist and because we from the theory of just where you realize that communities are predominantly poor, it is only fair that you provide for them what is liberal enough for the majority of countries. I was just citing that has a housing policy, and if you indeed went to the country, you'll be able to to find you'll be able to find that actually their policy has been effective, and they have greatly improved in terms of the housing and the structure at all. Then we also have planning issues. We have very poor urban and housing planning. We have improper land use management. So majority of our urban planners do not understand the topography, but also other details of what they are supposed to engage in order to have a better planning standard of environment, you cannot have uh, people residing where there are industries. But if you came to cities like Kampala, you realize that there is a whole industrial park that is just close to the residential settings of the people. So, in other words, you don't expect your population uh, to be breathing in healthy air. So, the chances that people who live around Kampala developing respiratory health issues is higher than those who live away from that particular location. So, in your area alone, you should also be able to look at where the issues of poor urban planning come in. For example, you have a health facility that is located where the school is, where school pre nursery, pre primary schools are, and therefore uh, the waste management of that health facility can actually have an impact on the pre-primary school. Why? Because if the management of the waste in the health facility is not okay, then the chances that uh, young people or those pupils might be able to interact with waste that they are not supposed to be interacting with. We had a scenario during the COVID where the dumping site of the health facilities in the community, and one of the community members who was mentally sick went to actually interact with some of the needles, with some of the cotton wool that they had picked from the ward and was recklessly dumped uh, in the dumping site in the community. So these are some of the issues, and they have very broad impact on the society, but also on the individuals themselves. So those are some of the problems. Whereas they are causing housing problems, but they also move away from housing problems and uh, and have and have challenges on public health, but also on reproductive health and so forth. Then we have rapid urbanization, overburdened infrastructure due to population growth. We have growth of unplanned settlements, slums due to overcrowding. So these are some of the drivers of our housing problems. So because our populations are growing very fast, the infrastructure that is there is overburdened. You realize markets where it is a 100 capacity seater, you find that 200 people are selling there, and then you realize that where 10 people are supposed to settle in an acre of land, you realize there are over 20. So it has overburdened our land, but also our infrastructures. Then, which has led to again unplanned settlements like we looked at earlier on, slums developing due to the issues of urban growth. Then we have poor infrastructure that is also causing the housing problems, and we're saying housing development on urban peripheries lack essential services such as water, roads, communication, but also we have no infrastructure provision in unplanned areas. So the mere fact that the roads, the waters are a problem that already affects the quality of our housing, and in the majority of our house, I mean of our settings and developing countries, they struggle to access electricity. All those are causing us problems here and there. Then we have what we call the bureaucratic obstacles for land titles and building permit. You must access a clearance from an authority, maybe the urban authority. You must have someone come and approve. You must have a land surveyor. So all these bureaucracies force people to construct unplannedly. And then we have what we call the financial constraint, and we in the financial constraint we have lack of access to credit, but also we have inability to afford quality housing material. In other words, it may not be possible for someone to construct a certain quality of a house because of the levels of income that they earn. So it may be very hard for someone to afford kind of housing. But again, one of the policies as the developing countries, majority of the developing countries, land ownership is by is traditional. It's hereditary, it's traditional, and it is by individual. So that makes this is their land that was given to them by their ancestor or by their grandfather, and therefore by that fact they cannot construct according to your wish, but rather their own, because this is their land. However, you realize in developed countries, uh, residential land is actually owned by government, and therefore government can put their the citizens or the residences of that particular place to occupy that place and then pay gradually. So that is where one of the major issues regarding housing in our developed world, the ownership of land is a very huge issue. However, with the quality of governments that we have, it may also be tricky for governments to own land, because then someone can be able to own your land and puts it for sale or uses it for picking loans from other countries and so forth. So if the quality of our governments were probably one that were community centered or were human centered, probably would people would allow that land is communally owned by government, and then people are allocated land for specific purpose. So you would have your residences here, your farming in a particular place, your sports center somewhere, your industries somewhere, your schools and other institutions and health facilities located in another place. Yeah. So that is what we have covered, and I would wish that we end here and continue from there, uh, so that we can look at sustainable housing, and we look at the key areas of interest, the benefit of space resource utilization, and world population growth, the key trends, factors affecting population distribution. We can run through these. I'd like to end when we gradually introduce the idea, and we could be able to do away with the mean complete what we complete. So unless we have any regarding presented, or we have any points that you wish to put up here, I would encourage you to say them. The space is yours now. Thank you.
So much for the lecture. Today the network is very explanation is me person what you have lectured today.